Okay, so I wanted to do a more in-depth video about Johann Hari's Stolen Focus. I briefly touched upon this in my September reading wrap-up, and there were a few comments about it, and I don't know, I just thought, like, this is one of those books that I read and I have so much to say about it, and I don't know if I like the book. I think I like the book, but also there's a lot of stuff that I don't like about the book. Making a video about it makes me think I don't like the book. And yeah, I just want to talk about it. Also, I'm in my pajama bottoms and I'm just gonna sit really casually right now. I did not get punched in the middle of the face. I tried something with my makeup and I think it looks a little weird. I apologize. Let me know what you think. Does it come across like, do you get it? Or is it weird? So some kind of background into my reading experience. I read this via audiobook on Libby, and it kind of expired in the first half. So I basically read it in two parts. Half of the book at some point and then big break, half the book at the other point. I think that's very important because I liked the second half of this book substantively better. And so it's almost like I read two books, one of which I was like, this is actually terrible, and one of which was like, this is actually kind of okay, and like the conclusion of this. I think part of the reason is because in the beginning, I think Johann Hari he's really talking a lot about himself. He has this stupid sabbatical to Cape Cod that is just so dumb, and I don't understand why he included it in this book. And he talks about his like nephew and this whole like trip to Graceland, and he's much more judgmental to people. I think he's much more he's just confused. He's just very, very confused. And I think in the beginning part, I think almost snooty. He's very snooty in the beginning. And it makes him really unlikable. I think towards the end, you start to develop a lot more sympathy for the fact of like, oh no, he doesn't think, okay, what am I saying? I think in the beginning, because he is so like talking about his experience in Cape Cod, talking about his nephew, the way he's judgmental, it almost makes him feel like, oh, he thinks that this is like an individual problem that individuals can solve. And that is not at all what the book is about. He goes into massive detail talking about all of the systemic ways via like companies that your attention is being taken and monopolized. He's talking about the ways in which like our diet, our issues with sleep, how our education systems are forming, the way as children we're, you know, even the way that we're like taught to play and interact with others. Like he goes into depth into a lot of these large, big systemic ways that our ability to focus and pay attention is being stolen from us, if you will. And so I think that that's also why the second half of the book is, in my opinion, much better, because it goes way more into detail about that other stuff. Way, way, way more into detail. So I think one of the issues of this book is that our focus and our attention there's a lot of contributing factors to our ability or not ability to do that. And so in some ways, I think the umbrella of this book is quite large, right? You can talk about our attention spans and talk about it from the perspective of like social media only. And in some ways, I think that would have been a slightly better book because I think it would have really like encapsulated a lot of what he was trying to say. But there are other factors at play, right? There's the elements of like sleeping right, eating right, the muscle, the ability to get into a flow state, stuff like that, like the science of paying attention and all of that. And so I think in some ways the scope of this book is so large that he touches so many things, and it's very awkward in that way. On the other hand, I think it is good to have a diversity of things to talk about. It's all has some amount of relevance. It's very interesting in that way. So that's just something to think about. It's a very broad book. And another reason why I bring this up is because I had seen someone like review this on Goodreads and I kind of follow them, and they'd given it 5 stars. And then someone talked to me about it and about how their school or something, this was like a suggested reading, and it was then removed because people were kind of complaining. Okay, complaining is kind of minimizing it, but they were saying that this book is in some ways kind of ableist, I guess. I was reading this and I also thought that there would be a lot of discussion about ADHD in this book. There is not. it's a very briefly mentioned part of the book. Like, if I'm being honest, not a protestable amount is given to that. And I also think that Johann Hari does kind of a good job trying to be as balanced as he can, right? He clearly has a perspective. I think his perspective is one that generally we should all be working to adjust our focus. And so I think that he wants solutions that are broad. So just kind of saying medicalize children, not medicalize, like medically treat children who have issues with attention. He thinks we all have those attention, our challenges to our attention. And so I think that's why he's probably not wanting to lead into like a specifically medicalized route. I think he also talks a lot about how trauma can affect our ability to pay attention, and conversation is about whether or not ADHD is kids are being diagnosed with ADHD when in fact what they're experiencing is like violence and trauma and abuse. I don't understand how that can be like that. I think that's probably true. I think that makes, to me, the way it was described in the book, that makes a lot of sense. I'm obviously not a researcher, I don't know, but I think that's really fair. I also think, okay, my perspective on this, I have two main things. First of all, I think that we should always be reflexive when it comes to diagnosing people. We should think about, why are people being diagnosed? Who's being diagnosed? For example, if a lot of kids are being diagnosed and we're seeing a disproportionate amount of like young Black boys being diagnosed or being medicated for something, we should really question why that's happening. Is this happening because this group of people is more likely to have, you know, well, I'm gonna say something stupid, but you know what I mean? Like, for example, like sickle cell anemia, right? More common in Black populations. Is this a case where something biologically with ADHD more common in Black populations? I would kind of probably say no, right? Personally, I don't think it is. I think that we are medicalizing a group of people who is often stigmatized in our society for being too rambunctious. We really like criminalize Blackness in a lot of ways, and I think that this is like an early way of criminalizing and othering Blackness. My perspective. Now, I also think that if you need to take medication, you need to take medication. You need to have conversations with your healthcare providers about the medication you need to be taken. It's none of my business what medication you take, unless it's like an EpiPen and I need to know because if you start swelling up, I need to be able to stab you, right? Like, that's two different things. But, so I don't care. Whatever you take, I don't care. But I also think, personally, we should have a conversation about what we're medicalizing and why we're medicalizing it. And I think one of the things about ADHD that I personally do not like, as someone who has never been diagnosed but probably has ADHD, like, for example, if you are working and you're like, oh my gosh, my job wants me to sit still and pay attention, actively be able to pay attention from 9 to 5 every single day, and I can't do that. I would rather work 8 to 9, take a break, 10 to 3, take a little break, you know what I mean? Like, that's maybe a way that we can adjust around folks who are neurodivergent, or you're not able to sit down and take a 3-hour-long test. Your brain does not work in that way, but yet we're making these college entrance exams, whatever they are around the world, these incredibly high, intense, a lot of pressure and attention is put on this thing, that there's just a part of the population where it's like, I'm never going to succeed at that thing. I'm never going to do well there. And there's a whole bunch of problems with standardized testing in general, but even more so when you add in a factor like ADHD. Why are we allowing so many children to not just like this to be a thing that determines their college career, especially given the fact that like that's not necessarily indicative of the rest of your life, right? Not only are we doing that, but we're also then, so we're putting all this, like, this test is going to be very important, but then we put the stress on these students of like, hey, you have this really important test coming up and you have to do well on it. Like, that is so stressful to those people who know that that's not something they're very good at. So I kind of feel like even if a child or an adult or someone wants to take medication, it should not be something where we are accepting the fact, well, you're different and therefore to fit into this, to succeed in this world, you have to be medicated. I don't think that's appropriate. I think that we should be willing to accept and understand and make changes and adapt our society so that folks don't have to take a medication just because they are different, just because they think differently. That is my opinion. For example, if there's a kid in a classroom and that kid is kind of rambunctious and maybe they're a little more animated, and maybe other kids are getting distracted, I don't think that means that little Billy, who's having a great time, should be medicated because other kids in the classroom, like, no, I think that is insane to say this child needs to take something that will alter their brain, you know, how their brain is functioning in that moment. That is just absolutely insane to me. Unless that child, like, that is actually helpful to them, that's like reducing stress or anxiety in that child, it should not be something where that is an expectation. Like, you're different, therefore change yourself in this extreme way, right? Especially because it's not, you know, there's absolutely no issue if you take any kind of medication, but like stuff like Adderall and Ritalin can be habit forming, you know, like there's no shame in doing that, but like that is something that you have to be, I don't know, I'm not saying I'm concerned, I'm not saying that people who take it are junkies or anything, I'm really not trying to say that, but like I think it is fair to say we should be careful about giving this to people because there are risks to taking this, and we should not be saying because you're different you have to medicate yourself. That's my little rant about that. Like, I don't know, I think that this book talked about so many things, and honestly, if I was a student who had read this book, I would be a little disappointed if everyone decided suddenly to not talk about it, because I think the benefit of this book is you could have a conversation. You could have a really nuanced and interesting conversation about this. So if you're ever in a situation and someone says, I don't want to read that book, be like, yo, homie, get it from the library, get it from the Libby app, but it's actually really worth it to read because you could learn some cool stuff about it. You can have some cool conversations about it. At least I think so. Okay, and I will also say, Mr. Johann Hari, I think another reason why I really didn't like him in the beginning is he is very big on telling you how people use social media, and I was just like, that has not been my experience, right? Like, he's talking about how everyone on Instagram, they're so vain, they're so self-obsessed, they just want all these likes, these dopamine rushes of the likes because they want to be hot and sexy and like feel rich and beautiful. Just like, that is not what everyone is using these apps for. Like, and I think maybe it's because I'm a millennial, right? And like Gen Z is so casual with their Instagram. They post like six times in their life, and it's like the ugliest photos ever, versus the millennial who's very poised and prim and proper. But also too, like, I've had so many lives on Instagram. Like, I used to just share kind of, when I started, like photos that I thought I took that were cool, or drawings that I did, and then I just posted like photos of myself and travel and college stuff, and then I did like little comedy videos. At some point I had a makeup Instagram where I connected with others on my makeup. Like, yes, at some point it was about me and about being hot, and sometimes it was just about me having fun, and sometimes it was about me trying to be funny. I think about my mom, who not only did she knit this very pretty sweater, she has a knitting Instagram. Like, are you really trying to say that my mom is getting likes or like desperately seeking out likes so she can get dopamine hits for people to tell her how hot she is when she's knitting? Like, I don't think so. So I think he really sees social media through his own perspective, and like the way he talks about Twitter, I was never a Twitterer like that, so I don't know. But he's like saying that like, what could you possibly communicate in the world in 140 characters? Like, I don't think that's what everyone's trying to do on that app. Or like, everyone needs to have a hot take as quickly as possible, and everyone's trying to go viral and get as many likes as possible. Are they? Is everyone trying to do that? Maybe you're trying to do that. I was looking through my Twitter, and first of all, I still have the bird. My like app symbol is still the little bird. I feel very fancy because of that. But I was looking through what I had posted, and what I noticed was, especially so after the full-scale invasion, it like exclusively became about that, because that's how I was using the app. It was for news, and it was not like, it was a place for me to learn what was happening. Before that, I was posting two things: either political stuff, vis-a-vis Trump and US politics or like Eastern European stuff, I posted a lot for me as someone who posted like 6 times in my entire Twitter career. But I would post stuff about like when there were protests in Belarus, when there were protests in like the far east of Russia. So to me, it was a place to like politically connect with certain things, and then also to write what I thought was funny. Not so much because I wanted massive likes. I think I had like 6 people following me. I was not a Twitterer, but I think it was a place for me to remember the funny stuff I was saying. And these are like the most lukewarm, not even that funny things, but like I posted something, I'm really into the trend where instead of calling it daydreaming, we are calling it manifestation. Makes me feel so more self-care, less lonely, weirdo. People who get their nipples pierced before a visible face piercing are telling you that they have conservative parents who pay their college tuition. Oh, and I also had things that were just stuff my mom said. Who is Tiffany Trump? My mom being both in and not in on the joke. So basically, that was also just me going down memory lane about my Twitter that I do not use. But it's just to say that I think Johann Hari has his own understanding of how some of these things are used. And even like further into that, I think sometimes he'll talk about like algorithms, and he's like, people don't really know what algorithms are, and I'm like, ooh, we do. We figured it out since you were writing that paragraph, sir. We figured out what an algorithm is. Or he'll talk, I think, about how young people use the internet, and I think he feels like the youths, oh my god, the poor youths, they don't even know anything about the internet. And I'm like, I don't know, I think we're actually like, especially young adults, I think are a lot better at navigating the internet and like reliable sources than adults. And I think that my theory about this is because folks who grew up on the internet learned from a very young age, don't trust any of this, you have to double check. Versus older people, they were told like, okay, like there are these official sources of information and you can trust them. If a teacher's telling you something, a teacher is trustworthy. If a news source is telling you something, a news source is kind of trustworthy. And we're like, everything is partisan, believe no one, everyone's a liar. Echo chambers, da-da-da-da-da. Like, I think we're a little bit more media internet literate in that way. So whenever he was talking about that, I just kind of personally disagreed. I think an example of this is, so I had someone tell me like, oh, did you see like AOC tweeted this really horrible, like something incredibly like inflammatory that AOC allegedly had tweeted, and I just Googled it and I was like, yeah, that's been confirmed as like a doctored screenshot, you know, like that's not true. Or yeah, just like other stuff that's happened before. And I think that people my age would be a little bit better about like being a little bit more thoughtful about that. I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm not saying every old person is bad at this. I just think that the youth have grown up with that a little bit more. And we've in general been like skeptical of power a little bit more. I also think, so to kind of go into a lot of where Johann Hari is going with this, and that slightly connects to my previous point, he really is trying to say that because our focus is being lost, the big problem there is that we're no longer able to collectively get together and, you know, fight for a type of change. And it's much harder to do that now. And we're so unfocused that we can't get together. And he uses examples such as how LGBTQIA folks had to get together and fight for their rights, and like the Stonewall riots, right? Talks about how women have really had to collectivize and come together to like fight for women's rights and gender equality. And because we're unable to do that now, like we are unable to do that now because we're so distracted. My thoughts on this are kind of mixed, because I think on one hand, especially like before George Floyd, yes, but I think after George Floyd's murder, this was even more established how the internet is truly a resource for identifying, gathering, joining together, learning about folks who have, you know, your similar views. And so on one hand, I disagree, because I think that the internet has actually allowed us to integrate and intersectionalize the things that we're trying to fight for. It's a good thing. Actually, we're able to be reminded of things. We're able to kind of keep focus on stuff because we don't have to like, we can keep it in our mind every day, right? Now all of a sudden, it's not just something that you think about when there's like a big news headline about it. Like, you know, you can think about the type of social justice that you care about every single day. You can follow and be engaged with activists and always be receiving updates. There's a good and a bad to that. For example, maybe you really need to focus on that. Like, you have an active thing you want to do, but the apps on which you are organizing or like kind of getting together to organize are at the same time the apps that are actively distracting you with advertisements, with models, with your friends, with funny memes. All of that is in the same place. And on the other hand, maybe you're having a really hard time and maybe you need to remove yourself from like really dark news, you know? Maybe you don't want to look at that for a while. You now cannot go on your apps to relax, to distract yourself, because those places are being filled with also the stuff that you're like more politically engaged with. And so I think that that's a dichotomy I wish was better explored. I think that to me is something that's really fascinating about the internet, is that it's a place where, not the internet in general, but like on like social media apps, right? Like it's all interlaced and intertwined. You know, your friends are there next to the celebrities. The people who you know in real life and you know what they look like without face filters are next to the people where you wouldn't even be able to recognize them on the street because their faces are so filtered and photoshopped, right? And it's like, there's also an element of that where it's like, there's a political element to that as well in terms of like organizing and the things that you care about that you follow. I also think the other issue is this like Overton window conversation where you're not as easily able to like find people who have your same-ish views on things. Like it's way more easier to not only get like radicalized in a way, which can be good, I think, in certain ways, but also I think can then be, it's harder to maybe then get that like to move somewhere. Like someone can have these like really radical high level things that they're trying to tell you about and you're like, that sounds awesome, but like what can I do to like make that radical reality a truth, right? Like when I was filming this video earlier that I've obviously already deleted and restarted, I was talking about like the Americans for muffins for breakfast, where every American should get a muffin for breakfast, right? You have a group of people who are wanting to do that, but then all of a sudden, in the same time you're talking about that, you have these people who are like, we're going to violently overtake the government so that we can make sure that every single American has access to a muffin. Like, you agree with that, but are you necessarily that radical about it? Maybe not. So it's this like conversation that ends up happening like this way, this kind of internal fighting. And then also at the same time, now instead of just having this like group of people that you would kind of maybe meet with offline, you'd go to a community organizing event, you would learn about these people and engage with them. It's this kind of weird online space. And then also on the other hand, you have these like muffin haters and they're like, everyone who eats muffins are idiots, we must ban muffins, make muffins illegal. And so now it feels like there's a lot of this fighting that's like lateral rather than like a collective group coming together on their personal views and issues and being able to punch up. There's this kind of like outward energy that feels kind of unfocused. So I think all this to say that I do think that there are challenges to our focus based on the internet, but I don't think that we necessarily are, like, we can still use the internet to actually teach people and educate people and get people to focus on something they wouldn't have been able to focus on if they were off internet and they were only visible to the challenges of their personal lives. So I don't really know if I have a conclusion there. I just think that that was something that maybe the book didn't discuss as much because the point of the book is to say that we're being too distracted. I think the last point to kind of bring up is that this book might, in some ways, you started and you think you're getting a self-help book. You're not going to. This is not a self-help book. This is not someone exactly teaching you how to focus better. There's a couple of things like trying to eat healthier, trying to get 9 hours of sleep, you know, and then there's also some like larger things like a 4-day work week has been it's been proven to be successful, and we can organize to getting that done. It might not work, but like you can try. You can maybe do some yoga. But then also things like we should think about social media. Like we should try and get places to send us like batch notifications. So instead of notifying you every single time you get an alert, a like, a comment, sending like one batch notification a day, so you're not constantly like drawn towards your phone. I thought that was kind of cool, and it'd be interesting to see if there was like an app that was doing that for people, so to avoid them, you know, having to look at their phone all the time. But basically it was saying like there's all these different ways that like we could improve our experiences, improve our ability to focus. But it's really not this self-help book, and I like that because I think that a lot of that stuff is marginally accessible. You know, like your ability to sleep is determined by a lot of things. And like I think about myself, you know, if I've been working till 7:30 and I want to take a walk because I haven't been outside all day, I need to eat dinner, and then also I want to read, like, you know, that might have me reading at midnight, and that might push my like sleep back till 1 a.m. But reading is really important to me, and so I might sacrifice sleep, which would allow me to focus better, because what I really want is to do this thing that I enjoy. And so yeah, there's ways in which like the self-helpier elements of this book, I think, and I think Johann also acknowledges this, they are only accessible in certain ways, and sometimes you need a more collective organization for that stuff to even work. So yeah, I think that the book is controversial, and in that way I want everyone to read it so they can tell me what they think about it. I think it's definitely like a discussion generating book. I think it's something that kind of gets you mad but also makes you think, and I definitely think it's the kind of book where you probably will change something about the way that you interact with the world after reading it. I definitely think that. The ending of this book, they talk about, Johann Hari talks about this idea of like the types of focus you have in your life, and he has spotlight, which is the thing you're doing like at the moment, right? The like thing that you're focusing on right now. Then there's the daylight, which is the way in which you identify who you are and your values, and it's kind of a very broad way of how you contextualize yourself. And there's a starlight, which is like your long-term goals, the life that you're working towards. Johann Hari also adds to this stadium lights, and this idea of like how we connect with and interact with others. And I had a commenter talk about how this perhaps like is not actually a form of focus, and I agree with you. I actually think that yeah, there is this way in which it's not a focus to necessarily like be able to see and identify others and connect with them, but I thought it'd be kind of cool to go over what these lights are for me. So my spotlight, I like really want to grow this channel. I really want to keep working and writing. I have like a writing project that I'm working on, so I'm working on that. My daylight are my values. I have values regarding democracy, regarding, you know, nations' sovereignty, regarding certain social justice issues, specifically focusing on like global health and access to health, affordable health care, and like especially like I think HIV and like wanting to work towards an HIV-free generation. My starlight is a desire to have a career that allows me to do that, and that allows me to like actively participate in global health solutions across the world. I think my stadium lights, for the past, you know, like almost 2 years at this point, has been wanting the war in Ukraine to end, connecting with people along that issue, along the politics of my country of birth, wanting to see a future without war, and restoration and reparations to Ukrainians, and wanting to participate in that. Those are my lights, and these that have like played a big role I think, thinking about this and thinking about who I am and being able to like identify myself in like words, right? And one of the last things that Johann talks about in his book is how when it was end of writing, there were very big wildfires in Australia. And they were so big, there was so much like smoke particles in the air that folks in like, I think Sydney, their smoke alarms were going off because of fires that were like miles away and they were not actively in danger of. Like the smoke alarms thought that their buildings were on fire. That's how much particles were in the air. So people were turning them off. And the irony of them turning off the thing that is not designed to warn them that there is a danger. And there is a danger, it's just not right there. It's just not right in front of them. It's miles away. But it is getting closer. And I think that that has been an image that has affected me deeply. And just the ways in which, when are we turning off the smoke alarms in our lives? Because the danger is not in the building. It's just miles away. And how much are we getting close and adapting to the smoke in our lives? Because it's easier to just turn the alarm off. And that is really vague. There's specific ways that that relates to my life. I don't know the ways in which it relates to yours. But yeah, I hope maybe, I know people are commenting saying like, yeah, I don't think I want to read that book that you kind of were complaining about in your September reading wrap up, but maybe one of you guys will. And maybe, or if you have read the book, let me know what you thought of my ramblings and what really stood out to you. Currently my reading is in a really weird place. I'm like kind of touching War and Peace again, but I really want to get into something more like spoopy and Halloweeny. But yeah, so that's where I am. I hope you're doing well. I know it's a really tough time right now. It's not, I hope weirdly enough, this video about focus served as a distraction for you. And I can't wait to see you in my next video. Bye.